Welcome to The Deeper You Go, The Weirder It Gets. I'm your host, garett.renon. So this video is my first attempt at bringing my podcast to YouTube. And so for my YouTube audience, which is very small compared to my podcast audience, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of jump right in and not provide a whole lot of context to what I'm talking about. So if this video interests you, I suggest that you start following my podcast, and this will provide a lot more context to what I'm talking about. But what I am talking about, or I'm going to talk about, is my year-long Sama. And so what that is, a year-long Sama is a way to make a connection to a plant spirit. This is done in the Shipibo tradition. This is done through ayahuasca. And so I am in the process of doing a year-long diet. And the words diet and Sama are essentially interchangeable. So I'm in the process of doing a year-long diet with a tree called Ayauma. And Ayauma is a very powerful and sacred medicinal tree that grows in the Amazon jungle. And so back in January, I went down to a place called Niue Rao and opened up my year-long diet. And so I thought what the purpose of this episode is to give everybody an update as to how things are going. So I'm now 2 months in to this diet. So I want to talk about how's my connection and have I learned anything? Has Ayauma taught me anything? And so when it comes to the connection, I will say that the connection is very good and it's very strong. See, in the plant Sama world, you can diet anything that's considered a master plant. And long story short, is a master plant is something that has medicinal and spiritual and energetic qualities. And so there are plants and there are trees, and all of them are powerful, but the trees are said to be a lot more powerful than the plants. And this should make a lot of sense when you go out into nature, whether it's the jungle or the forest or even the desert. You have plants and you have trees, and the most dominating species in whatever environment you are in are always the trees. So likewise, the trees have a lot more powerful energy associated to them. And so this is my 5th plant Sama, and this is the first time doing a tree. And I can tell you that it's true. The trees are a lot more powerful, and I feel the presence of Ayauma with me all the time. It feels like a guardian angel or a spiritual guide that's just with me all the time. And the thing that's very interesting about this is these plants or trees, once you make a connection to them, they communicate to you. But the way they communicate to you is not necessarily through words, but it's more through intuition and insights. And I think of it as we're all connected to the spirit world, or to the all, as they're called in the 7 Hermetic Principles, or the source. So whatever you want to think about, whatever term you want to use, but there's the force, right? In Star Wars, there's something that binds us all together. There's a source that everything emanated from. And so I think of this as a good kind of analogy is like, let's say you go to a foreign city in a foreign country, maybe a place that you don't even speak the language. If you were to show up there by yourself, and there's a good chance you could have a good time, meet a lot of good people, and gain a lot of positive experiences from that. But if you go by yourself in this unknown territory, there's also a very high likelihood that you could run into trouble, that you could stumble into a bad neighborhood and actually have a very bad time. Likewise, if you were to go to that same city, but you went there with someone who lives in that city, then the likelihood of you having a better time significantly increases, and the chances of you getting in trouble significantly decrease. And so that's one of the reasons why you diet plants, is to have guides for the spirit world to help you out, to help you navigate the chaos that is everything. And so Ayauma has, since I've dieted it, so I don't know if I said 2 months in to a year-long Sama, and so I have felt Ayauma's presence the whole time, and it just feels like it's there all the time. And so one of the big things it's teaching me is it's really helping me tune into my own intuition and listening to my heart and listening to my gut. And so one of the big things Ayauma helped me with is it helped remove some negative, toxic people out of my life. So I found myself in this situation where and I'm sure we've all been there before, where you know someone and you're in that realm of it's complicated, right? So you're not necessarily dating them, but you have this relationship with them, and it's complicated. We've all been there. And so I had been talking with this person, and we've had kind of a long history in this kind of on and off type of a thing. And the thing about being on a diet is you're not supposed to, well, you can't have sex and you're not supposed to be intimate. So going into this diet, I was wondering, well, am I going to have any type of relationship with someone, is in like a romantic relationship, even though I can't necessarily be intimate. But this particular person, she's somewhat connected into the medicinal world, and that I'm the plant medicine world, and understands what I'm going through. And so we've kind of been talking, but as we were talking, and over the last 2 months, I kept getting these weird intuitions, like something's up, something doesn't feel right, something's off. And so I start having kind of these questions of like, what's really going on here? And as I'm thinking about that, Ayauma keeps popping up, and I'm asking questions when we're having conversations, trying to dig a little deeper to find out what's going on. And the whole time I'm questioning, like, is this girl the one, or is she not the one? Should I be pursuing a relationship or not? And then at that point, I felt like Ayauma came in, and Ayauma feels a lot like a buddy, right? And was like, look, bro, she's not the one, and I'm going to show you why. And so I just kind of get flooded with all these visions and thoughts. And so then we end up having this conversation. And so I talked to her, and it turns out that she's been very deceitful over the last several months. And while that was definitely hard to deal with, I'm extremely grateful for that, right? Because if you have someone in your life who's toxic, or at the very least not helping you out, we need to cut these cords. I like to think about, they always say you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. And I believe that's true. And so it's always a good thing to try to reevaluate who are the core people in your life, and are they serving you? Are they helping you? And sometimes we have to remove people out of our core group of people, even though it may be hard. And so that's essentially what happened. And I'm extremely grateful for that. And what was really fascinating about this, and I feel like Ayauma is really helping me tune into that intuition, because all these visions and thoughts that were kind of coming into my head were 100% spot on. In fact, I was kind of impressed. I was like, wow. everything that I felt was going on was actually happening. And, you know, this also makes me think of another quote. So it goes something like this, where it's like a wise man learns from their own mistakes, but the wisest man learns from the mistakes of others. And so this situation taught me a lot about honesty, right? Like sometimes there are harsh truths that people do not want to say because the truth can oftentimes hurt. But what can hurt more than the truth is suppressing the truth, because the longer you suppress the truth, it just starts to spiral, and it builds and it builds and builds, and all this pressure. And then if that truth ever gets revealed, well, then you find yourself in a situation that is no longer repairable. And that's kind of essentially what happened in my situation. Whereas if the truth would have came out at the beginning, it would have sucked, it would have been hard to deal with, but the relationship, maybe not in a romantic way, could have been saved, but maybe there could have been a friendship saved, right? It would have been salvageable. But because this thing went on and on and on, and then it exploded, well, then it was like, well, now we're at a point of no return. Because in relationships, whether they're romantic or friendships, right? I don't know about you, but in my world, trust and respect are everything. And if you don't have those, then you don't have a foundation to build off of. And anyway, that's kind of where I'm at with the check-in of how the diet's going. So doing great, feeling great. I guess I'll give one more kind of update for those, because I did a podcast on the restrictions, and someone asked me the other day, what's the hardest thing? Because I mentioned the hardest things about the restrictions are the no sex, the no salt, and then I would even say like no spices, and restricting the type of media you intake. And obviously the biggest one people always gravitate towards is the no sex. And is that the hardest restriction? And for me, it's actually not. I mean, yes, it's going to suck to not have sex for an entire year. Although I've mentioned this before, as I've been growing on this journey, like sex is not even about the sex for me. It's more about the actual connection and the relationship. Like I am no longer interested in the random hookups. I'm no longer interested in hookup culture. I don't want to use someone. See, the problem with our society nowadays with apps like Tinder is that people use other people essentially for masturbation devices, right? They hook up with someone just to satisfy a primal urge, no connection, and then they just move on to the next person. And while that can be fun, I think there is a cost to your spiritual development. And I just think that there's something more to sex. So in all honesty, I do not miss sex. I do miss a very deep, intimate connection with someone. But the whole point of this is the hardest thing for me has actually been the lack of salt. Right now, my body hurts. See, when you don't have salt in your system, you don't have proper electrolytes. And if you've ever kind of been dehydrated, you know that you're subject to muscle cramps. Well, that's essentially how my body feels. I feel like I'm walking around in a constant muscle cramp. Now, it's very subtle. It's probably a 3 or 4 on a scale of 10. So I'm not in pain, but I'm just constantly sore. So that's kind of been tough to deal with. And I hear that it starts to get better in about a month, that your body will start to adjust to having the lack of salt. So all in all, I'd say that the diet is going extremely well. I'm extremely happy with my connection to Ayauma and how it's helping me out. It's helping me, it's clearing a path. It's this guide and protector saying, we don't need this person, we don't need that, move out of the way because we're going somewhere. So that's where I am. So if you like this video, one, I suggest you check out my podcast. It's called the same name, Deeper You Go, the weirder it gets. You can find it on all platforms. Yeah, and that's all I got. See you on the other side.